Well, hello and welcome to In the Growth Space. I'm David McGlennon and I'm your host. This is episode 171, and I'm really excited about this conversation because I've talked a lot about being in our growth space and growing both ourselves, our teams, our leadership. And now we're going to talk about growing our company and really even a personal growth from a founder's perspective. Today's guest is a guy by the name of Malcolm Peace. And Malcolm is making Texas feel smaller with his fantastic work with small to mid-sized businesses throughout the state. His company is called Tsetserra Growth Partners, and they work with well-established businesses, with owners who are just about to retire, but still want to see their businesses thrive. So this is a really strong passion of mine, and it's really one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about emerging leaders, is because I want to be able to help these business owners to feel comfortable that their leaders are capable of being handed off to. But Malcolm and his team helped rewrite the operating playbook while maintaining the owner's culture with a strong succession plan. So if you're a founder and you're thinking about that succession plan and you're thinking about handing off to the next generation of leaders, this is the episode for you. And with Tsetserra Growth Partners' experience and focus on operational excellence, they strive to double the company's revenue in just 2 short years. And the work's intensive. And in a minute, though, you're going to see how Malcolm and his team are up to the task and how they put their tools in place to give that owner a peace of mind and peace of mind that their business is going to grow for years to come. So I'm really excited about this conversation because there's so many business owners who are looking to find a way to hand off the organization, to create a succession plan, and then feel confident about handing it off. So today's conversation is a really important one. So let's go ahead and get into that conversation right now.
Well, hey, Malcolm, great to be with you here on the podcast. Welcome to In the Growth Space, man.
Yeah, Dave, thanks to David. I appreciate you having me. This is an honor. And obviously excited to be able to share whatever I can, my experience with the audience and kind of what we do. And again, our frameworks and the things that we think that have worked for us. So hope it's beneficial. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that you and your team, you buy businesses, but more importantly, you really help businesses scale to the next level and become more efficient and increase the productivity. Talk a little bit about the how you got into that line of business and that niche, so to speak.
Yeah. Truth be told, I was working with another kind of smaller investment group in Central Texas. We were buying we were buying hospitality, food and beverage businesses. And consequently, we were interacting with a lot of blue collar guys. So we were building these hospitality businesses, and I was in charge of working with the septic installer, the core sampling guy, the roll-off dumpster. And I just started having these interactions over and over again. And what they really was me tend to talk to the best person in town was the business owner. So it was often the case where someone would give me a referral and they would say, hey, you've got to talk to Paul. You've got to talk to so-and-so. And turns out that they were all the business owners and they had such a great reputation, but their business was built around them. And so as I kind of looked at the landscape and said, hey, like, I love your business. What does it look like for someone to transition out of your business? Most of them didn't have a succession plan, anybody to hand the business off to. And so in the end, what ends up happening is the business just dies with them. And that's a sad story when it's a 30-year-old, septic install business or roll-off dumpster or core sampling businesses. In those cases, I looked at it and said, how can we take over these businesses, keep the business going? It's got a great reputation. And so we kind of started call it the genesis of that thesis around that. And then going into 2020, kind of, just opportunities started to present themselves to be able to go in that direction.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And that is such a huge, I'll call it a problem and a huge challenge today, because there are so many small businesses. I mean, our country here in America is built on small businesses, and I love it. I love small businesses, and but being able to transition out is really difficult. I've really run into a lot of different organizations and business owners that share that same kind of a challenge. And so I guess how do you come in and help them then? What's the process that you take them through?
Yeah, great question. So nothing is perfect, right? We kind of have a 100-day plan that we try to implement as like, this is what we need to start the culture change with. And I can kind of talk about that in more detail in a second. But, to answer your question really directly, a lot of them, it's like going to the gym. I was explaining this to somebody the other day. It's a matter of, you go to the gym, and if you were to work all upper body, your upper body is going to look great. If you don't work your lower body, it's just not going to. It's just the reality. And so you buy as a byproduct every day, you're ultimately working on something. And so what ended up happening, and as we bought businesses and we realized this, is that a lot of the employees are also building those muscles because they're interacting with that owner. And so the owner is optimizing for going to them for the answers. And so everything becomes a centralized business around them. And it's not a decentralized business with accountability and autonomy. It's a business where they've gotten used to that. Okay, the owner has an issue. Let me go ask them 5, 10, 15 questions, and then I'll get my answer, or I'll go have a game plan. Rather than, let me think on my own. I've got my own smarts. The owner has hired me because I'm capable, and giving them an autonomy and then measuring their success based on that, whether it be a supervisor, manager, senior manager, somebody in the back office, somebody even at the level of, like, we have welders and fabricators and other folks like that. Like, all those types of people need to know, what are they actually being measured by in their day.
Right, right. Well, and I think that I've worked with a business owner just recently, and one of the things that I found is that this particular business owner tends to be the bottleneck, like that, because of what you just described. They're the bottleneck for really further growth, and because they want to do it all, and they don't. I don't know if it's not that they don't trust the employees. That may be part of it. But I think part of it is too, it's their business. And so their thinking is, at least that mindset is, I've got to do this, because if I don't do it, it's not going to get done, or it's not going to get done, quote unquote, right.
Yeah, I had a meeting with somebody a couple of weeks ago, and he said something that was like, has just profoundly changed me, and I hope it's helpful to the audience. But what he said was, no employee, they will care about your business. They will work hard. They will work hard for the role that they're playing, but they will probably never understand the gravity of the decisions that they make. And that was really important to me, because that kind of summarized or put into perspective, when someone makes a mistake, often the conflict arises because the employee or the owner of the business has a misalignment of the gravity of the effect of that decision. Right. So they're like, well, I made this one thing. I spent $1,000 here. Well, no, hold on a second, because we needed to pay this vendor first, and it causes this. Now it causes that. Like, they don't necessarily have the forethought to think through that sometimes. And there are some that do. I without a doubt, there are definitely people do. But because the owner is the center of the business, and they're kind of the funnel, called the quality control funnel for a lot of things, they end up being in a circumstance where that employee never actually learns the gravity of that effect. Why you don't reply to that person to get a quote out in 5 days versus 2, why that makes an effect on the bottom line. Like, they don't understand, they can't see that correlation because you never allow them to see that correlation. So I'm of the belief that that's what you optimize to, is here is like your 1 to 2 things that are incredibly important for your role to, quote unquote, be successful in. And then let's understand, what are the decisions within that scope that actually materially affect the business. And let me train you on that, because that will allow you to be proactive if you're inclined to do so. And also, it allows you to be thoughtful on your approach and or involvement, for other people in the organization when needed.
Yeah. Man, I love that, because I think that that's exactly what would help an organization to be able to grow. But it's so hard for that owner sometimes to slow down enough so that they can actually go faster later on. It's
Sure.
it's almost like going from second gear to third gear, because when you do that, you're behind the power curve just a little bit, but pretty soon you catch up and you're going to be going faster.
Yeah.
So taking the time to train that person, to give them the what it looks like, that bigger view as an owner,
Sure.
man, it makes a big difference.
It does. And it's not easy. And honestly, what we always try to emphasize is we spend a lot of time in our kind of buy box is blue collar industrial type businesses in Texas, kind of 3 to 12 million in revenue and doing around a million kind of net earnings or EBITDA. And in that space, most of the time, if not all the time, it's family owned or founder owned still the business. And so as a result, like they started from 0 to 1, and 0 to 1 is a totally different skill set than where we are, taking kind of low 7-figure businesses and taking them to 8-figure businesses. That's just a different kind of a skill set. And so as a result, either the actual leader needs to change or they need to be trained up about thinking about this differently. And a lot of it has to do with people, getting people on the same page, not creating a circumstance where you just have hired hands. That's what tends to be at the beginning, where they're kind of going 0 to 7 figures, is they're just trying to get as many people on board with the best budget possible, call it Moneyball. And they're just trying to ultimately get as many hired hands as possible to handle things so that they can maybe focus on something else, whether it be business development or product development or whatever they're trying to do. They're just trying to create hired hands. The next is, how do you create actual roles within an organization chart that has autonomy and has also accountability to that role?
Yeah, boy. And that's a big change. How do you navigate that change? Because one of the things that I've noticed is that when people get outside of their comfort zone, they want to go back and they want to go backwards because they think, hey, the good old days were really great. But how
Yeah.
do you navigate that change and help, existing team members and also that, more importantly, the business owner, to be able to know that, look, it's okay to get outside your comfort zone and to be able to try these new things. How do you do that?
Yeah. So maybe it's a cynic in me. I think there's some points in the development of the business where it's okay that they just don't do that because of their lifestyle, right? Like, I think that's
Sure.
really what
Yeah.
it comes down to.
Yep.
A lot of the business owners that we interact with are making about $1 million a year,
Hmm.
probably more money than they ever expected, right? And
Sure.
so that's just the small sampling that I have. There's many other circumstances everybody's experiencing, but
Yeah.
a lot of the time that we interact with folks is like, if they were to create more sales, or they were to create more layers of management, or they were to add all these other things,
Hmm.
they don't see the return on that time, right?
Hmm.
They are maybe working 20 to 40 hours a week. They're not really killing themselves too crazy, but at the same while, they've made more money than they ever expected. And so for us, again, in our small sampling of experience, a lot of those business owners just don't want to change because it worked in the past. It got them to a certain point, and they're kind of looking at, okay, well, what is this next chapter is it's really going to take a lot to get to over that hump, or I'm going to have to hire somebody that's 6 figures in cost that I've never done before. You can
Right.
imagine how many conversations I've had with just blue collar industrial type people to say, hey, we're going to go professionalize this business. We're going to hire, and this is our new budget for hiring. Like, their eyes go way big most
Yeah.
often than not, right? And so
Yeah.
like that part's hard, right? It's really
Sure.
complicated for somebody to say, I've never spent more than $80,000, $90,000, and now I'm going to go spend 120. They're like, I don't even see how
I'll
that
do
makes
that.
sense.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
there's just, you've built these muscles, right? You've built them and built them and built them and built them. And they were the right skill sets and the right muscles developed for that 0 to 7-figure mark. But now the business needs something different. And
Right.
that's just a hard moment of shift. And some don't want to make that shift, and that's okay. I'm
Right.
sorry. I've just come to realize that that's okay.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I'm sure that there are some people and some businesses who they just get comfortable. They get okay with the status quo. They like playing golf, 4 or 5 times a week, and
Yep.
they're in the office maybe 20 hours a week, and that's just kind of part of the culture. And I think that's probably not the company though that you buy. The company that you're going
Yeah.
to be look
So
at and buy, they got to have at least a certain mindset of, hey, I think there's potential here, right?
That's right. So we definitely look at it and say, is there something we can build off of here? Where has the business been hindered because of the owner? And is there
Mhm.
a possibility for this business to grow outside of that? And often it's looking at like that next level of management, who's in
Mhm.
place, what is like kind of their skill set, what's the dynamic, how fast can we kind of get them involved in the process, get them on board, who's the key person to get on board.
Right.
I have found, so we did a model and we're iterating. We're in like the walking phase, I'd like to say right now.
Sure.
The crawling phase was we'd buy a business, Malcolm would step in as CEO for 6 months. And as a result, like then I would eject out and we get some leadership or we develop internally or whatever it might be.
Right.
Not the best way to do things. Just FYI, if anybody wants to buy businesses or at least multiple businesses, not the best way to do things. So now we're in a point where we are identifying the businesses and we've got a bench of folks that are wanting to be a part of what we're doing. And they're actually coming in with us on the businesses right when we buy them. So they're part of that initial conversation and developing that business in that transition. And so all that to be said, that's a way more scalable model for us and my skill set and use of time. But previously, what we would end up doing is I would go spend time with like one key person. I'm like, all right, I
Mm.
cannot lose this person. They do the following thing. They run the following department. Like, let me just make sure I get all the information out of their minds and
Mhm.
understand them and de-risk the business from that perspective.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of the owners, they can transition some of that knowledge, but if you give that empowerment to that employee to say, hey, you can think independently, you can build your own team independently, most often than not, I find that they're actually a little bit better at it, but they've always been hindered because of
Right.
the owner having some sort of perception, right? So if you
Yeah.
go in my opinion, if you go into buying a business and you just assume that everybody outside of the owner is way more knowledgeable than you and you stay humble in that way, I think that you find that if you can empower them to build their own teams, things over time tend to work out a little bit better than maybe you even predicted or the previous owner could have handled.
Man, Malcolm, I think there's so much wisdom to that because that it really plays into the idea that I believe in, that there's so much potential within people in every organization. If we just unleash that, if we just unlock that potential, we're going to be able to explode a business and really grow it to a place where it's beyond our wildest imagination. So being able to unlock that potential within people, it just requires the business owner to just kind of let go, and
Yeah.
that can be scary, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
One of my gripes, and I'm going to say this, so it's all sensitivity, but it's a gripe,
Yeah.
is every time I've entered a business, the previous owner has given titles to their employees, and those employees have no idea what those titles mean.
What they mean,
So
sure.
we create within 2 weeks, we create an organization chart. So we assess what's going on. We start
Yeah.
creating an organization chart. We have a family lunch. So we're in Texas, so I tend to go to Texas Roadhouse because they seem to be kind of everywhere.
Yeah,
And
sure.
so
I'm sure.
we'll go get a steak lunch. We'll sit down, usually in the conference room or whatever space we have to get everybody in the same room. We'll
Mm.
sit down and we'll have a conversation, and I hand out an organization chart. I tend to not talk about really anything else than here's the current status of the business. Here's what's going on personnel wise, right?
Wow.
They're not ready to understand. Their paycheck is hit at least once or twice, depending on how pay cycles work. They're hit
Yep.
once or twice. They feel comfortable. Their paycheck's not going to bounce.
Yep.
And now it's just to talk about here's the current status, right? Who reports to who? Here's the titles that everybody has. And what often I have found is those titles were very arbitrarily given out, and then no one knows what they actually mean by that title,
Mm.
right? If you were to be an organization, you say, I'm an account representative, but you're doing janitorial work, they don't coalesce with one another, right? So this is what ends up happening a lot in the organizations because people wear so many different hats, but they're given a title maybe because they do get, some sort of employment agreement, or they have to write it on some document or something what their title is. They have some sort of title, but it doesn't really correlate to what they actually do in the day. So we spend the time to define titles and then define what are the measurable things that go on with that. So short story, like I had I had managers and supervisors in this last business that we bought that didn't know what a supervisor meant. Like they didn't realize a supervisor means you supervise, right? Like it's
Right.
in word specifically. And so they were always never privy to annual reviews. Like they weren't invited into the annual review conversation. So
Yeah.
the previous owner would have annual reviews with everybody,
Yeah.
But the reality is like the supervisor was giving a title as a supervisor, but they never actually got to review their employees or give any potential feedback on how that
Mm.
employee is actually doing. More or less, they didn't even actually get a chance to build their own team. They were just handed a team and said, supervise, right? And
Yeah.
so we
Mm.
changed a lot of that. And what ends up happening is, like, true story, 3 days ago, talking with my CPA, who was a carryover from the previous owner, like he was telling me, Malcolm, I've never seen such stability in the payroll. Thank you so much. I don't have to go check, chase Texas Workforce Commission because we've fired people and hired people and fired people and hired people, all these types of things, right? But the reality is, like, the owner was making those decisions. The owner was saying, hey, you're fired today, you're hired today, you're fired today, because they were just responding to the circumstance. When in reality, it's like, no, 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 no. My supervisors, actually, one of their KPIs is their ability to retain employees. So if they're going to retain their employee by measurement, they're also going to be able to hire the process. So they build their own teams. So anyways, I'm
Yeah,
totally
yeah.
out of annual reviews. We're totally out of the hiring process. There's an SOP. Everybody runs it. They build their own team, and we haven't replaced anybody or lost anybody in a long, long time. So anyways, that's just
That's
what we do.
awesome. Well, so it sounds like, a lot of times what you're doing is you're helping that business owner to really grow into being a true CEO or a true president of an organization, rather than being, the master of all of the tasks, and allowing their people to do those other things. So,
Sure.
so let me ask this. What's the like psychological makeup of that business owner that is attracted to you, to be able to say, hey, I want my business to grow? And the best way for that to happen is to bring in some outside resources, both financially, business knowledge wise. How do you find those kinds of people? Like, what are you looking for? Maybe it's because I'm thinking psychological mindset more than anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, small sample size of the people that we just interact with and the businesses that we've purchased. In that a lot of the time they're dealing with the 3 Ds is what I like to call them. They're dealing with death, reality of life is moving on,
Yep.
disinterest, they've got other things they want to be able to do, or life circumstances like divorce, right? They've got
Right.
these life changes that are taking place, and so they need an outlet to transition that business to some extent, but they also are maybe not ready, or they're kind of approaching that point. So there's a business owner right now in San Antonio. We've been talking for 3 years. He knows who he is if you ever heard this podcast. And he's a great guy. We talk pretty regularly. I would love to run his business. He's not ready to transition. He's
Sure.
not really got a solution to be able to fulfill that leadership role. And so he needs to at some point, right?
Yeah.
And that's okay. I think that's perfectly fine. It's part of the course. You've built a business. I've got a friend who says there's two different types of CEOs. There's the chief enterprise officer, there's the executive officer, and then there's also the chief energy officer. And you can kind of be one of the both, right? Like,
Sure.
we are trying to build circumstances where the first one is actually possible. Most
Mm.
owners have operated actually as the second, where they have just been the energy and they're all doing those types of things. And so I actually tend to resonate with a lot with that second kind of owner, because they look at me and they're like, okay, this is a mid-30s guy. He's coming in and he's going to bring a bunch of energy and he's going to do all these types of things. I've always wanted to see that happen from my son, niece, nephew, or daughter. And that's just not a reality for them. And so we kind of solve that solution that they need
Mm.
solving for. They need to transition at one point. They need all those types of things. And they actually are very attracted to somebody that brings a bit of energy. But reality is that we tend to take the energy CEO type person and convert them to actually somebody that is a CEO that has other leadership in place. And so that's just that transition point. And that, again, it's not a discredit to the owner. The owner has built something that needed a certain skill set at the time, and it just needs a different skill set now.
Yeah, and I think something you said just a moment ago too is that a business owner like the one you were describing in San Antonio is they likely don't know, like, what's next, like what's the next season of their life look like. And that's one of the things that I've been helping business owners to be able to look at, to be able to think through, like, well, what could that next season look like, and how might you use your current gifts and talents and expertise in another way. and not have the stress of owning and and running a business. And I think that just knowing that there is a next season, you talk about death and divorce and being disabled and all of those D's, and distractions, and when business owners start to face some of those things, that's when the reality I believe begins to kind of set in. And so they have to start to think about some of these things. And so I hope that if you're a business owner and you're listening to this podcast, that you start to think about some of these contingencies, because we tend to not think about them. In your age, you've got somebody in your mid 30s or maybe even early 40s, and you've got life by the tail. But man, when you get to be my age, you're early 60s, and you're thinking, wow, the end is in sight. I see the finish line, but what comes after the finish line? And so I think it's really important for business owners to start to think about these things.
Yeah. And I think the reality is they do have options. And I would encourage any business owner that's in this circumstance or exploring kind of these thoughts or wondering kind of what is next, like start preparing now rather than later. I think it takes, 1 to 2 years really to get a business prepared to transition well. I had a circumstance, and again, I'm kind of just story and framework kind of based kind of guy. We had a business that we looked at just northeast Austin. And candidly, like the business owner, great business. He had built a really professionalized business, done as best he could, lost a customer. And I, shared that with me, kind of had a drop in revenue, had a customer that went overseas with the product supplying that they were doing. And I asked, what did you do? How did you respond? Like what happened here? And he listed off probably about 17 things that he did, never mentioning once what the employees did. And I said to him, I just want you to know, like, I think you've built an incredible business, but what you just described is incredibly risky for me, because you didn't show me like I delegated all these types of things, or somebody jumped in and did this, or someone did this sales part, or whatever the case may be. You just described all the things that you did. Again, becoming that CEO of energy, you didn't learn how to delegate and create a circumstance and culture where people are able to kind of just step into the void of, I know what to do, how to handle this when things are uncertain. And so that part is a really hard thing for owners to realize. For somebody like me to come in and want to buy your business, like that's a risk that actually brings down your business valuation, candidly. But it also at the same while like makes it difficult for me to see, how do I fit into this picture? Because the only way I fit into this picture is me becoming the CEO of energy. Rather than this organization kind of operates and it's got some things going on that allow it to run fairly independently and people get measured knowingly, right? And so that's the challenge. True story. Was sitting down with an owner at a Brazilian steakhouse. We were getting really close on the deal. We're sitting there chatting, and he actually slipped in an information that put me off. He told me that he tells me he has a phone, a landline in his bathroom because he answers phones sometimes when he's in the bathroom, whether it be a shower or what have you. And so he said it like he was so happy about himself.
He's like, yeah, this is the greatest thing ever, huh?
Yeah, I was like, wow, I will never hire for that, nor will I will ever be doing that. So yeah, your business actually has a risk there that you have just personally just tried to solve. And so yeah, all these things are real, right? And people run their businesses. That's the beauty of commerce of America, or the ability to kind of run it the way you want to run it. But if you're really trying to transition your business to kind of that next level of growth, or hand the business off to someone like me who wants to just run with that baton, just know that we're going to build a business that is not centralized around the business owner. It's going to be decentralized, and there is going to be a transition that happens with that, both for the people, key employees internally, and also just the way the business culture is.
Yeah. So what are some key things that business owners ought to be thinking about in preparation for that transition? Like, what are some things that they need to be doing today, whether it's handing off to a successor or maybe selling a business, to somebody like you? Like, what are some of the things that they need to be thinking about and preparing for, and maybe even doing now, just as they, you talked about a couple of times about de-risking their business, and I get that, but to them, they may not understand what that means. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, great question. So, and I never want to, this is just my framework, right? So everyone's going to approach this differently. This is just our framework that made sense, and it's something we've been able to rally people behind. So a lot of the time, if you go out and you're looking to, sell your business, you're going to reach out to a business advisor or a small investment bank at the sizes that we tend to deal with. They're great people. A lot of them have run businesses before. They will get you on board to help you market your business and do all those types of things. A lot of them are going to want to clean up your books and kind of get your back office cleaned up. I think that's the last thing that you do if you're a business owner that wants to transition. Okay.
Probably the
My
easiest thing to do.
my perspective is we use what's called we call the top down P&L approach. So whenever you look at a profit and loss statement, you have your revenue at the top, you have your cost of goods sold or labor, and then you've got all the other OpEx expenses that are going on in the business, whether it be rent, leases, all these types of things, right? Back office, accounting, anything related to that. So I always tell people, if you're trying to clean up your books, first get it in that order to make sure it's clean so another person looking at it can understand it. But regardless, that sets the precedence of the priority of decisions and or SOPs and documentation and processes that you want to get cleaned up in order. So we always look at it and say, okay, what is the revenue? Where does it come from? Does it come from 15 outside salespeople that you are having on commission and you don't know them very well? Does it come from referrals? Does it come from a lead source on the website? Does it come or whatever it might be? Where does the actual revenue come from and where is it weighted, right? Is it weighted 80% to one person, which sadly, a lot of businesses, particularly business services that I interact with, they tend to have that kind of product mix or there's a sales mix, I should say, where they've, became a vendor essentially for Colt or somebody big or whatever, Holt, or they, whatever it might be. So
they have one single source.
Correct. Makes up a big part of it. And then all of a sudden that changes and that dynamic of that business is really tough. And I've had these conversations a lot. So I can speak to that's not something to be ashamed of. That's just, hey, this is where I would focus my energy the most. I wouldn't care about cleaning up my books and all these types of things and all these hours and hours and hours. I would say, okay, the product or the sales mix is weighted this certain way, or there's some irregularity in sales, or there's unreliability in the sales force that you have. Focus on that primarily. And then the next is how thin are the margins, right? And how competitive can you be on that labor? There's a business that I'm looking at right now in Bryan College Station that the labor force is going to be real tough. They've got a nice revenue situation. I liked it. It checked all the boxes there. But then when we go to the labor side, Bryan College Station is not really building out a whole bunch of technical schools. This business needs technical schools. And so you end up bringing in people from out of the area that are more expensive, just candidly. They're going to need to get paid more to relocate and be there. And that creates a situation. And so those are all the things that I would say from an order perspective, I would focus on that makes your business more sustainable, allows it to be de-risked, and it allows it to be transferable with some confidence. That's the big part of it.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, if there's some concentration of services or concentration of products or customers, then that it creates risk for anybody coming in, and the multiple is going to slowly go down. If anybody's interested in it, the multiple is going to be, a lot lower because of that, because there's so much risk in it. So talk a little bit about the value of maybe the multiple, when I think you and I both know what a multiple is, but there may be some business owners that, are in that blue collar space, but what does that mean, and how do businesses get bought? So maybe explain that a little bit, because I think, even though it may sound elementary, somebody may be listening that has a small plumbing business and they're ready to retire, but they don't know how to sell a business, or they think in their mind it's worth one thing, but because of what you just described, maybe it's worth something else. So just maybe talk a little bit about that real quick.
Yeah, great question. So there's a few different ways, and I'll kind of keep it to three main ones. The most common one is typically based on the earnings of the business, whether it be EBITDA, which is kind of a measure of kind of a slightly larger business, or the next is seller discretionary earnings, which is really a business where it's an owner operator type business. So they tend to be kind of less than 500 in net earnings, and net earnings includes kind of what the owner is paying themselves, whether it be 100, 200, 300 grand. That's kind of tends to be sellers discretionary earnings. And so that's the measure of the business's ability to generate free cash flow to the owner is a multiple gets added onto that. So in our space, a lot of the time we're at like 2.5 to 4.5. It can kind of range onto that number. So if you have, whatever it might be, if you have $200,000 kind of SDE, meaning that's the total that the owner is able to take home at the end of the day, maybe they pay themselves 100, but they also have another 100 that comes off free cash flow. Then on that, and you have a 3 multiple, the business is worth $600,000. That's one way to look at it. EBITDA is the earnings, similar to that, as if there was a general manager / CEO / president running the business as part of the salary. So it's the net profit of the business. Think of it like that in typical operations, subbing out that there's kind of a key leader in there, and that gets included as that. And so it's really looked at as a business that's not owner operator. It's really got some leadership in place. And so we kind of flip back and forth when we're talking to owners on like how to value the business, either between SDE and EBITDA, which is kind of a multiple of earnings, is one way. The other way is sometimes it's just based on the assets of the business. The business maybe generates, decent cash flow, but maybe the utilization of those assets might be a little bit lower. So they've got, maybe it's $1 million would be the multiple or multiple of earnings, but they've got $2 million of assets that are actually usable assets that run the business, and they're not dilapidated, but they're actually usable. Like, you can value a business based on that as well. It's just pure asset value. You minus the liabilities, but not to get too technical, you minus the liabilities out when you kind of go to the closing. But that is that's another way. And then the last way that is sometimes less common, but it's worth a conversation if someone's stuck on a number, is one of earnings. And so, or sorry, not earnings, of revenue. So you can do a multiple of revenue. It's kind of the 3 primary ones that we tend to have conversations with in this space. And of that, it's a smaller multiple, typically 1, maybe to 2 times. In our space, kind of blue collar industrial type businesses. Every industry is different. But in that case, you look at it and say, okay, this is kind of the future projected revenue. We're paying you out for that future projected revenue, and you kind of get to lock that in at the closing table when you buy this business or someone's transitioning to take over the business. So that's kind of the 3 primary ways I would say a business should be considering at our sizes.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Malcolm. I think that's really important and really, helpful. I think for some of those smaller businesses that want to know, like, how do I sell my business? And so let me ask this, maybe just as we wrap up here. What are some things that as a business owner is thinking about a transition, whatever that transition may be? What are some things that you recommend that they think about, and just from a personal perspective, because I'm sure you've seen business owners who, they sell their business, but either I won't say they regret it, but they're not sure because they don't have something to go to. Like, what's the mindset of that business owner that they need to have as they transition?
Yeah. One is, you never want to feel, I'm super sensitive to that because it does happen, right? I've been in circumstances where we've bought businesses from folks that have passed away, and then the family inherits the business and they don't know how to run it. And so we've been in those circumstances that those are just challenging moments. And so what I tell an owner is, you never feel like you want to have to rush to sell the business, right? Like, you want to sell not just so when the business is doing great, because sometimes things just happen, outside factors just happen. But it's a matter of, can you sell a business when you're excited, about the transition out, right? And that might be transitioning onto, you've got a piece of property you want to buy in Rockport and you want to go fishing, and you've got family and kids and all these types of circumstances going out there, or maybe you want to divest out a little bit and sell a portion of the business, and the other portion, there's another function of the business that you want to keep onto. I've been in those conversations. I've been with folks that run service businesses that also build some inventory stuff on landscaping, and they would rather just own that little piece of the landscaping inventory building that they do. And so whatever it might be, right? Like, so there's all those things. You have to have something to go to, whether it be family or some other work. And we talked about earlier, right? The 3Ds, right? Like, death is one of those ones that's just impending for everybody. It's just what it is. And you don't want to be in a situation where, like, that is really pressing, where you're feeling anxious about the fact that you've got a sickness or illness or whatever, and you don't have a plan. Those things happen. And so you want to start preparing that. And so going back to my to my statement earlier about kind of the top-down approach on the P&L framework, like start creating the frameworks and the culture within the organization that allows people to understand what is a priority, what does it look like, so you can get yourself out of those types of things, and you can then go start experiencing, okay, what does it look like for me to only work 30 hours a week? What does it look like for me to only work 20 hours a week? And you might find that you can hold on to the business for a little bit longer, but by and large, if you do that process, you will for sure be able to de-risk the business and prepare it for somebody else to take over and make it even more attractive of a multiple. So I always tell people, focus on that. You're going to end up being, everything's going to be thrown at you in a day. You walk into the office. I had yesterday something that just came up that was super, super urgent. That was a huge distraction. That will always happen every single day. And getting the team to slow down and realize, like, hold on a second. This is, of the 3 buckets of things, this is an OpEx issue. They can wait, but we've got this other sales issue, this quote that needs to go out, and creating that dichotomy of this is the highest priority thing. That for an owner to start doing that, they can see themselves out of the business, which is actually probably super comforting to them because they've put so much blood, sweat, and tears into it. And so you've got to be able to see that. So I hope that answers.
That's great.
I want to say business owners that have built businesses 0 to 7 figures or somewhere in that range or even above, you've done the hardest thing possible. I have a different set of skill sets. I'm super grateful to ever be able to have the opportunity to run a business like yours. And at the end of the day, it's about the next phase is about more people being involved and allowing them to have the autonomy and accountability that lets the business thrive and depend on them rather than on you.
Yeah, I love that, Malcolm. So, Malcolm, how can people get in touch with you if they, what they've heard today? They'd love to be able to kind of touch base with you and just, maybe test the waters a little bit.
Sure. So we're based in Austin, but we look at businesses throughout Texas. I've got a network of other folks that are buying businesses in other parts of the country. And so if there's ever a time where I can introduce somebody, happy to do so. But yeah, we buy businesses exclusively in Texas, kind of blue collar industrial. And so you can reach us out at Tsetserra.com. So it's our firm is called Tsetserra Growth Partners. Going back to that, it goes to my family's origin from Southern Africa. And just the way my grandfather ran businesses in that area, it was part of Mozambique and Zimbabwe, the border of that area. We take care of people internally and externally. That's our goal, and that's how my grandfather did it. And it's just an homage to them and really the way he ran businesses. But yeah, you can find us at Tsetserra.com. It's spelled Tsetserra, or online on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm all over there. I'm happy to have any conversations, or you can just email me at info@Tsetserra.com. One other thing that, for business owners is I'm a big believer that these conversations are incredibly important to have, not when you're needing to have them, right? So I'm wide open to having conversations around, just what this looks like from a buyer's perspective. You're going to get a lot of perspective if you go to a business advisor or a business broker or somebody of that nature about what does it look like to sell and the process of selling. My perspective comes from what does it look like for someone to run your business afterwards. And so that I hope that, adds any value to anybody. I tend to do these conversations often, just to add some perspective of why I would be interested in your business or not, for that matter. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that's awesome, Malcolm. Thank you so much, man. This has been a really great conversation, and I'm sure that it's really piqued the interest of some people. Maybe even if they're not in Texas, but at least people that are thinking about that transition and how to do it and what to prepare for and what to think about. So thank you so much for this conversation. It's been really, really helpful.
Thanks, David. Thanks for having me.
You got it.